You know, almost nobody knows what the Byzantine Empire was anymore. I'm not sure anybody cares what the Byzantine Empire was anymore. But for 1,000 years, 996 maybe to be more exact, the Byzantine Empire existed as a thriving empire, strong, rich, and in many ways a fair place. It had a certain balance to it, and it was all headed by, as you can see here on the screen, the Emperor Justinian. It was all headed by emperors who, in some ways, were supposed to be not God, but the representative of God, somehow or another filled with godliness. And you can see here this around Justinian's head, there's a circle. And of course, students always think that that's a halo. It's really not. It's called a nimbus. And it indicates that in some way, Justinian was filled with the Holy Spirit and spoke for God. The emperor was, the Byzantine emperor was about as close to God as you could get, and yet still be human. And it's an important place. The empire itself was probably, I guess, if you had to pick a founder, it'd be Constantine the Great. Um, Constantine the Great took a little fishing village town right where Europe and Asia meet, and there was a town called Byzantium, and he built this enormous city there. Um, Constantine, of course, the second longest ruler of all emperors, and pretty tough guy, pretty smart guy. Maybe not the Einstein of emperors, but certainly a man who had quite a vision, and the person who turns the Roman Empire officially into a Christian empire. Now, you under Constantine, you could still be, whatever you want to be, but basically the Roman Empire becomes Christian, and that's going to have really big important effects down the road. Um, how did the Byzantine Empire get separated from the Roman Empire? Well, back in the late 200s, the Emperor Diocletian, and if you've been following this series, Diocletian was a guy who brought order out of chaos and restored the Roman Empire. And he divided the empire, and the empire was divided from time to time. And around 395, under an emperor we know as Theodosius the Great, he made a final division of the empire, which you can see on the map here. And everything in red becomes the Eastern Empire, and everything in green becomes the Western Empire. People if you had a choice, if emperors had a choice, they always took the Eastern Empire because it was much wealthier, and also had much better frontiers. So you were going to be doing less fighting on your frontiers. And so over the years, the Western Empire is going to come under attack, and by 476 is going to be gone. But the Eastern emperors, who are going to become the Byzantine emperors, they lived in this city called Constantinople with water, lots of water on three sides of it. And on the land side, the one side of the Constantinople that faced the land, you have walls like these. Now, this is long before there are cannon, drones, missiles, anything like that. If you were firing, arrows at these walls, probably wasn't going to work very well. And it's only when you finally get cannon that these walls are finally breached. More than 100 years, 1,000 years after the founding of the Byzantine Empire. And here we are in 476 when the Western Empire falls, and you can see it's It's the eastern half of the empire, and that's about all it is. But Justinian believed that, well, if you're a Roman emperor, right? They're still Roman emperors. They thought of themselves. We call them Byzantines or the Byzantine Empire. They didn't call themselves that. They called themselves Romans, and they had every right to call themselves Romans because there's no break between the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. It's a matter of convenience that we call it Byzantine Empire. And Justinian reconquered a good chunk of the old Roman Empire. And he might have pulled off, he might have recreated or he might have regathered that western section, except for the fact that the Byzantine Empire was hit by the bubonic plague and just knocked flat. But he still managed. He had great generals, and he still managed to get much of the old Roman Empire back by the time he dies. It's a tough world. And by 717, this would be about the time of Leo III, the Byzantine Empire seemed to have shrunken back. Now, the Byzantine Empire was an autocracy. What the emperor said, no question, went, except for the fact that you had a senate. And while you had aristocracy, you also had a strong middle class. And so, and you had a long, almost 2,000 years long tradition of rule and how to rule, laws and legalities. And, it was, the Byzantine Empire had all the experience of the Roman Empire preserved in it. 867, again, it continues to shrink. But then, 1025, the Roman Empire the Byzantine Empire was able to re-expand. All it took was a good emperor, and really, in an empire which was dependent upon emperors, when you had a good emperor, the empire expanded. When you had an emperor who didn't know what they were doing, or maybe you had serious divisions within the empire, it shrank. But it was awfully hard to kill. And as I say, it's not going to die until finally somebody comes up with big enough cannon to punch through those walls. So it really is a remarkable thing, and it's going to go on to, as I say, 1453. This last great surge of land acquisition comes under the emperor, dies in 1025, Basil II. And you can see here, this is we don't actually know what Basil looked like. He probably looked pretty much like this. And of course, he has the nimbus. Okay, so, you've had the nimbus since, 500 years by this time, at least. And the idea that's in some way, shape, or form, the emperor had a direct line to God. Maybe there was some static on it from time to time, but the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church are going to come out of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire is going to continue and essentially save the Greek view of, well, not just philosophy, but of religion. The Western world is going to function under a somewhat different view of Christianity than the Greek world is. This is Russia. This is the Kremlin. And of course, although this is the Kremlin's built out of churches. And these are Russian Orthodox churches, and Russian Orthodox is Greek Orthodox. There's a form of Greek Orthodoxy. So, the Byzantine Empire preserves for 1,000 years the Greek ideas of Christianity, and they will eventually, when Constantinople finally falls, the idea, the center of Greek Orthodoxy will shift northward into Russia, which will call itself the Third Rome, after Rome and after Constantinople. And more than that is many of the things, many things are saved by the fact that the Byzantine Empire not only survived but withstood attacks of all types for, as I say, 1,000 years, and probably at least equal to the salvation of Greek Christianity. Of course, is the fact that under Justinian, the 1,000 or so years of Roman law that had gone before him were put into codes. They were rationalized. People made sense out of them. Where there were contradictions, they worked these things out. And so you get the Code of Justinian, out of which almost all European law flows, and also almost all the methodology that is used. The emperors could be autocratic, and they were. But the Roman idea of due process, that there was a way to do things and you ought to do it that way, is something that never goes away. And so, I don't know what to say about the Byzantine Empire, except to say that it was a remarkable empire, one that gives us much of what the world is today. And of course, I don't think that the Greek world has ever quite, the Greek and Russian world and that area in there, ever quite lost its belief that someday there would be a new Greek emperor, a new Byzantine emperor, and the czars and Stalin and people like that continued to try to recreate it. Well, anyway, it's a subject we know too little about, or most people know too little about it, and but it's a very, very important part of the history of the world, not just the history of the Mediterranean. Anyway, everybody take care out there. Stay calm, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll all see each other again. Bye-bye.